Venezuelan former intelligence chief Hugo Carvajal remains in Spain avoiding extradition as he keeps revealing shady financing from the Maduro regime to different figures, to different governments, and to different actors of the geopolitical table. According to different reports, he sent a statement to the Spanish justice claiming that during his period as the intelligence chief of Venezuela, he received plenty of material pointing out that Caracas was basically financing different leaders and political parties all around the world. These include Néstor Kirchner and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner in Argentina. This includes Evo Morales in Bolivia. This includes, of course, Lula da Silva in Brazil, Fernando Lugo in Paraguay, Omanta Uyala in Peru, Manuel Zelaya in Honduras, Gustavo Petro in Colombia, the Five-Star Movement in Italy, and of course, Podemos in Spain. In previous episodes here on Newsweek, we have been talking and informing about this situation, especially the way that the Venezuelan regime, according to the former intelligence chief Hugo Carvajal, was financing Podemos, which is the extreme left-wing party in Spain, and of course the Five-Star Movement in Italy. Both of these situations were quite remarkable because, as we said in previous shows, in previous episodes, we need to take into consideration the fact that Podemos is currently a significant part of the Spanish government, given the fact that the Spanish government is nothing more than a coalition of different parties. And one of the main parties that conform this Spanish government is actually Podemos. On the other hand, the thing about the Five-Star Movement, as we said in previous episodes, is also quite remarkable because we need to remember that the Five-Star Movement was pretty recently the government of Italy. Until pretty recently, the Five-Star Movement won the presidential election and became the biggest political faction in the European country, to the point where it controlled the executive branch. Of course, this only confirms what many people have been claiming and what many independent reports have been claiming over the last few decades, which is the fact that during the time of former Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez, he managed to put a lot of left-wing governments all across the region, especially in South America. What seems quite curious, quite particular, quite interesting about this situation is that if we take into consideration the governments that the Chavismo, the Venezuelan regime, managed to put in power in South America, we can see a pretty significant absence. And we're talking about Colombia. And not because the Venezuelan regime didn't make any effort. As a matter of fact, the Venezuelan regime made a lot of efforts to put a left-wing government in Colombia that could end up being aligned with Caracas. However, the Venezuelan regime failed to make this happen, mostly because of the fact that it was former President Álvaro Uribe, the one who was ruling here in Colombia, and he had a pretty high popularity back in those days here in Colombia, and he was a center-right leader who was the biggest foe, the biggest enemy of Caracas here in this region. Another thing that Carvajal told the Spanish justice was that the Maduro regime not only paid a significant amount of money to these political figures, governments, and political parties, but also terrorist groups, terrorist and criminal groups. Of course, he didn't mention anything. He didn't give any name. Many reports suggest that this could be a strategy to make the Spanish justice to extend his presence in Spain so he could avoid extradition. And of course, he's buying a lot of time with this, essentially with this detail that he's not revealing any names so he could get more time and eventually give the names. However, many believe that the names of these terrorist and criminal groups could be ELN, and FARC, which are the two Marxist guerrilla in Colombia, and of course Hezbollah in Iran, considering the pretty close relations that Venezuela and Iran established since the rise of Hugo Chavez. On the other hand, he also revealed that Caracas gave $20 million to Argentina and pointed out that these payments all around the world are made essentially to make these leaders and government defend and legitimize the regime, which of course we all could imagine. This money is basically to establish different type of diplomatic, political, and economic alliances with different countries around the world in order for the Venezuelan regime to create some kind of shield, considering the incredible abuses that this tyranny have been committing over the last few years, and of course to create the narrative all around the world with different governments around the world that what is taking place in Venezuela, the tragedy that is taking place in Venezuela, is nothing more than the fault or the consequences of the different sanctions imposed by the United States. Reporting from Medellin, Colombia, Luis Orozco, Newsweek.